I just feel like I've been around the block, ripping up fantasy stock, working around the clock. Look at the view from the top. Researching rookies a lot? No, I just be listening to pods. Yeah, one in particular, I'm just a messenger. Let me just pass on the rock. Browning, brunning, pruning, pronouncing ain't what he's doing. What he's doing is not losing, but infusing you with new things. And there's Dennis the Bennett, yeah. The man is a menace, yeah. Building a dynasty, some of the finest things. Promise you won't regret it. Sly as a fox, cultured in pop. Give him his props. Here is a thought, here is a box, and you cannot compare them at all. So don't even try. Careful with the news, but when you use a take, I take up Tony Fire. I mean Dyer, because anyone else is a huge mistake. Whoa, fantasy round table, fantasy round table, yeah. Fantasy round table. Come take a look at the crown, baby. Hey, fantasy round table, fantasy round table, woo. Fantasy round table. Come take a look at the crown, baby. Go.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Fantasy Football Roundtable Podcast. It is Friday. The NFL season has officially gotten underway as we've had our first live game, and we are wrapping up our division previews. The last two teams left, the Denver Broncos and the Los Angeles Chargers. I'll be taking a look at those as well as a few news headlines from the week. Wanted to welcome you in. Dennis had something come up and could not be available today, so I am running a little bit solo. We'll probably have a little bit of a quicker episode, but nobody spends more time depressingly watching the Denver Broncos than this Denver Broncos fan here. So I'm probably the perfect person to cover them for a preview. We'll be talking about the Chargers as well. But first, diving in, a couple of news and notes. It is the season for NFL injuries and other news. The NFL first announced that they are going to be exploring some new line-to-gain technology. A lot of discussion over the last couple of years about the chain gangs and whether that is really still the best way in 2024 to be able to tell if a team made a first down. They are going to be piloting out some new technology. Won't be in use during the regular season this year because those kind of things always take a little bit of time to get adopted, but something to look forward to. I will be curious to see how that goes in some of the preseason games where they put that into play, testing it out. Any way that you can get a little more accurate knowing where the first down line is could be a good thing. Next up, we had some injuries. D'Onta Foreman injured, got hit in the head and neck area and was taken to a hospital. All of his x-rays and tests came back negative. That is the good news. They don't know how long he is going to be out for the Browns. Nick Chubb currently on the PUP list as he recovers from that devastating knee injury a year ago. They brought in Foreman to be a little bit of insurance and depth, particularly in the beginning part of the season. So it is worth keeping an eye out if he can get back healthy, and also to keep monitoring the status for Nick Chubb. I would guess at the bare minimum, he will be a little bit restricted to start the season. So that means Jerome Ford, if you are out there, if you've been holding him in dynasty leagues, you're in good shape. But as you start to transition to redraft season, I actually think he's going to be worth a higher pick than you might take just on his own, because still a good rush offense for the Cleveland Browns, and it's looking more and more likely like he might have a major role, at least in the early going. I suspect he's going to be involved throughout the season. We mentioned that when we were doing the previews, but something to keep an eye out on with D'Onta Foreman now suffering his own injury. Injury also affecting one of the teams we're looking at today, and that is the Chargers. Justin Herbert has plantar fascia, and that is going to keep him out most of the preseason. He's going to be in a boot for a little while. They expect him to be back to start the regular season. I think he will be in there as well. As a Broncos fan, I do remember in the later years of Peyton Manning's time in Denver, he also dealt with that plantar fascia injury. It's very painful, it can be for quarterbacks. Limits mobility. Herbert actually had been a somewhat decent runner and a somewhat decent running threat the last couple of years. So it'll be interesting to see how that impacts that part of his game. I also think maybe a little bit of a slower start for the Chargers. They are changing schemes and they are radically changing personnel. He has obviously played with Josh Palmer before, got a little bit of chemistry maybe with Quentin Johnston from last year, but Ladd McConkey, Brendan Rice, those guys coming in, brand new tight ends, brand new system and offense, missing out on some valuable practice time and probably won't get to play play with them in the preseason. So it'll be worth monitoring to see how that all plays out. Another injury that's going to be one that we're going to keep an eye out is DeAndre Hopkins has a knee injury he's dealing with. They expect him to be out 4 to 6 weeks. And if you're doing the quick math, that would suggest to you he will be back at or near the beginning of the regular season, which is probably true. How slow will he be to adjust and get in? We'll have to see. Hopkins, the good news is he did play in all those games with Will Levis last year, so they have a little chemistry, but it is a new offense and a new scheme. They're also working in Calvin Ridley, Tyler Boyd, Tony Pollard, a little bit of a different running game. So again, a veteran guy who's missing a little bit of time. I think he's still going to be okay, depending on how you feel about that Titans passing game in general. But something to keep an eye out with. Hopkins missing 4 to 6 weeks. He's going to miss a lot of valuable practice reps and training. Wouldn't be surprised if he gets off to a little bit of a slower start. Last, before we get to the previews, as mentioned, we did actually have NFL action. We only got 2.5 quarters before weather caused the game to be suspended. The Chicago Bears beat the Houston Texans 21-17. I think my major takeaways, it was thrilling to have football back. It was interesting to watch the new kickoffs. That's something that'll be fun to watch throughout the preseason as we get used to a new normal in the NFL. Hard to take away a lot from this game as both the Texans and the Bears sat all their starters and really players of note. So keep that with a grain of salt when you look at some of the performances. For the Texans side, I thought Davis Mills looked pretty good, 10 of 13, 102 yards and a touchdown. Case Keenum was also fairly solid, had 7 of 9, 78 and a touchdown. In the passing game, Xavier Hutchinson, 5 for 56, seems pretty good. Maybe has a shot at making the roster a little bit lower on the lower end. With players of consequence not playing last night, guys even that are balling out, I think are really playing to make a roster spot and to be depth. That's how I feel about Cam Akers. I saw a few people in some of my leagues picking him up again. Coming off his second Achilles injury, he looked pretty decent. Had 5 carries for 13 yards, but did catch 2 passes for 18, including a touchdown. Nice to see him back out there. But the only running backs that we saw that had action for the Texans last night were J.J. Taylor, Daria Gunbowale, and Cam Akers, and then we saw Jawar Jordan later in the game. They held out, obviously, Joe Mixon, who we figure will be the starter. They also held out Damian Pierce. So I think these guys are probably fighting for third, fourth kind of running back spots. But Akers, looked decent. Got that touchdown. I don't know if I would be running out to pick him up in either dynasty or redraft. I think it's a long shot that he is involved much this season. For the Bears, Tyson Bagent started, but Brett Rippon really the story. 11 of 15, 166 yards, 3 touchdowns, really making his case to make the team. And I think that would be if Chicago decides to keep 3 quarterbacks, because I feel like Bagent's pretty well locked in. We know Caleb Williams will be there. Interesting for them in the rushing department, DeAndre Swift held out. So I think that tells me he's pretty far ahead and is their number 1 back. But both Khalil Herbert and Roschon Johnson saw action last night. Khalil Herbert, 4 for 35, did have a 19-yard run that he broke off. 6 for 24 for Roschon Johnson. He also caught a pass. Interesting to see them get involved. One guy who had himself a night was Colin Johnson. Now on his 3rd team, had 3 catches for 56 yards and 2 touchdowns. Obviously, the Bears, much like the Texans, have 3 pretty good receivers that we expect to be at the top of the depth chart in DJ Moore, Keenan Allen, and the rookie Rome Odunze. They also have a couple of tight ends. But Colin Johnson, showed some good range, made some good catches, had touchdowns. And I think that could be a positive sign for him making the roster. That'll be something to watch out for. Both these teams still have 3 more preseason games, so these guys will get more of a chance to state their case. But a couple of guys looking decent out there and making their case for making a roster. Going to continue on now and dive into the last 2 team previews. We are finishing up here in the AFC West. And first up is the Denver Broncos 2023 finish. They were 8-9 in the first season under Sean Payton. That was good enough for 3rd in the AFC West. But they really shook up the team quite a bit and started a major overhaul this offseason. Key departures, quarterback Russell Wilson was released and has now gone to the Pittsburgh Steelers. Center Lloyd Cushenberry signed with the Tennessee Titans. They traded wide receiver Jerry Jeudy to the Cleveland Browns. Safety Justin Simmons was released, still a free agent. I'll be curious to see where he goes. He was a great player in Denver for a long time. I think he's still got some left. And linebacker Josie Jewell signed with the Carolina Panthers. Among their additions, they did a kind of low-cost trade for quarterback Zach Wilson, formerly the number 2 overall pick from the Jets, to give them another body and another option in the quarterback room. They picked up wide receiver Josh Reynolds, who was with the Lions last year. They picked up defensive end Malcolm Roach, who formerly played with the Saints, and they traded for defensive end John Franklin Myers from the Jets. They also signed linebacker Cody Barton and safety Brandon Jones. In the draft, they hammered a lot of the skill position players. They grabbed the quarterback Bo Nix out of Oregon with the number 12 overall pick. They grabbed his Oregon teammate Troy Franklin at wide receiver in the 4th round and grabbed Notre Dame running back Audric Estime in the 5th round. In the 2nd round, they grabbed Jonah Ellis, a good edge rusher. Fantasy finishes from last year: Russell Wilson was quarterback 14. Jarrett Stidham, who started the last 2 games, was quarterback 50. In the backfield, Javonte Williams, running back 29. Samaje Perine, the veteran, was running back 40. And Jaleel McLaughlin, the undrafted rookie free agent, was running back 46. In the passing game, Cortland Sutton was their number 1 receiver, 59 receptions. He caught 10 touchdowns, finished as wide receiver 35. Jerry Jeudy was wide receiver 50. Brandon Johnson was actually their 3rd man up, wide receiver 86. Marvin Mims was wide receiver 89 as a rookie. Last year, Josh Reynolds was wide receiver 55 for the Detroit Lions. At tight end, Greg Dulcich didn't get on the field much due to injuries, but Adam Troutman led the way at tight end 40. Lucas Kroll, a couple of interesting moments, finished as tight end 73. When you talk about fantasy expectations, you have to begin with who ends up playing quarterback. I have gone back and forth this offseason. It seems like, based on the latest camp reports, it's pretty much down to Bo Nix and Jarrett Stidham. That's how I figured it would end up going. Zach Wilson probably doing his best to try to make the roster. We will see, preseason can change some things. A lot of hype about Nix and every play he does well in training camp going out there. I think there is a decent chance that Denver will start Nix because, much like the Chicago Bears and the Washington Commanders, they don't really have an established veteran quarterback that should take that position. Stidham could do it. We saw him. He was not too bad in the 2 starts that he made. I wouldn't be shocked if he starts a few games, but I think we're going to see Nix sooner rather than later, and at least for a majority of the season. That feels like the way it's trending. That being said, I'm still a little lower on him. I have him around the QB 25 ranking for redraft. I think he's a player that could get better over time, but I'm not sold on him having a huge rookie year. Backfield is another question. Javonte Williams would profile as their starter. They have the veteran Perine. They have Jaleel McLaughlin. Now they have the rookie Audric Estime. They have another undrafted rookie free agent, Blake Watson. I think Watson's probably, since he's on PUP now, more likely a practice squad kind of guy, but I would expect they're going to try to keep him in the fold in some way. The big question now, Denver kept 3 running backs last year. I have thought for a while they're probably going to keep 3 tailbacks this year. There's been some rumblings they may try to move Javonte Williams. I think that bears watching this off season. I also want to see them in some game action. You get varying reports even here in the Denver media. I know they're some people are very high on Estime and McLaughlin. McLaughlin seemed to see his role fade a little bit down the stretch last season. They played Samaje Perine a lot more in some crucial situations. So I'll be curious to see how that plays out as we go through. Samaje Perine, another one as a veteran that could end up being the odd man out if they decide that they want to keep the younger backs. Denver feels like a team in transition. Javonte Williams going into a contract year. Maybe didn't have as explosive a year as some of us had hoped last year. Could he be better a year further removed from his knee injury? I think ultimately Williams ends up leading the backfield, but I think Estime and McLaughlin are going to be heavily involved. I don't think any of them rises above a running back 3 area. We didn't see any of them really above running back 3 last year. I think the leader in the pack, I think it's going to be Williams, probably in that running back, 28 to 32 range, and then a couple running backs in the 40s and 50s as they compete. And then it's going to be curious to see what Denver does this next offseason. I guess the theme for the Broncos on offense is questions and transitions. That's certainly the case with Cortland Sutton. He got a little bit of an extra boost in his contract. Seems like they're going to stick with him this year. There were rumblings all offseason he may move. I also wouldn't rule out, if Denver doesn't start strong, him being a guy that gets moved in the middle of the season, because it's one of the best trade assets that the Broncos still have. Beyond that, I think it's a real wide open wide receiver room. Could see Franklin getting involved. There's been a lot of talk about Mims getting a chance to step up in year 2. I would like to see that. Tim Patrick, the veteran who's missed the better part of the last 2 years with injury, is trying to work his way back. And Josh Reynolds, we've heard a lot of great things about him from camp as well. So I think those are probably all guys that will end up making the final roster. Look for preseason games and early in the season to really set that rotation and see how it goes. Same is really true at tight end. They have Adam Troutman. They love the potential of Lucas Krull. Greg Dulcich is the elephant in the room. He has been the last 3 years. Can he stay healthy? Can he deliver on his potential and promise? I liked his traits and what we had seen of him in the time he was able to be on the field as a rookie, and that potential in Sean Payton's offense. I still do. I am having less and less confidence that he can stay healthy and have a meaningful role on the field. That's one of the things we're going to have to watch this season. I don't think any Broncos tight end finishes in the top 25. And even though I think Sutton will probably lead the way at wide receiver, I don't think any of their receivers finish above a wide receiver 4. I'm not incredibly bullish on this team or this offense. You might have gathered that from some of my projections. Maybe it's me as a fan seeing them in a bit of a rebuild, but I think this could be a bit of a transition season for Denver. I wouldn't be surprised if they finish 4th in the AFC West and now near the bottom of the league. I expect them to be in top 5 draft pick range, maybe even top 3 draft picks. I think there's still some work to do. We'll see even more next offseason when they release themselves from more of the dead cap from Russell Wilson. They have more cap room to play with. They have a full complement of draft picks. And I think that we'll see even more of these longtime veterans getting moved on as they build a younger team. I think in a couple of years, this could be a fun Denver team to watch. It's probably going to be a little bit more of a slog again this year. Not what Denver fans want to hear, but if we're being honest, that's probably where we're at. Next up is the Los Angeles Chargers. They came into the season with some playoff aspirations, but things did not go well. They ended up finishing 5-12. 4th in the AFC West after a horrendous loss to the Raiders in December. They let go of head coach Brandon Staley and their GM Tom Telesco. They ended up bringing in Jim Harbaugh to take over as head coach, and they have Greg Roman now running the offense. So we expect there's going to be quite a different look, and that's also going to be due to personnel. A lot of longtime veterans on this team departed, especially on offense. Austin Eckler left in free agency, went to the Commanders. Keenan Allen was traded to the Chicago Bears, where tight end Gerald Everett also signed. Their other starting wide receiver, Mike Williams, signed with the New York Jets. They also lost linebackers Kenneth Murray and Eric Kendricks. Among those brought in, running backs Gus Edwards and J.K. Dobbins joined the team. Both had played with Greg Roman in the Baltimore Ravens. DJ Chark joined as a veteran wide receiver, and they got a couple of veteran tight ends in Will Dissly and Hayden Hurst. They also picked up veteran linebacker Bud Dupree and cornerback Christian Fulton. In the draft, they went and hammered the offensive line. Their first pick was the big tackle Joe Alt, should give them some beef up front. They also went and grabbed Georgia wide receiver Ladd McConkey. Later in the draft, they grabbed a running back prospect in Kamani Vidal and wide receiver Brendan Rice. Last year, fantasy finishes, Justin Herbert finished as QB 17, missed the back stretch of the season with injury. QB Easton Stick came in and was quarterback 43. Austin Eckler was running back 26. Gus Edwards, who was with the Ravens, actually was running back 25, so a little comparable there. Keenan Allen was wide receiver 8 last year. Josh Palmer, who missed time with injury, was wide receiver 65. And first-round pick Quentin Johnson, who had a very disappointing rookie season, was only wide receiver 74. DJ Chark was wide receiver 55 in Carolina. Gerald Everett was tight end 23. Donald Parham, tight end 28. Will Dissly, by comparison, was tight end 51 in Seattle, where he split reps with Noah Fant. When it comes to fantasy, I think they're really going to change to a more run-heavy offense. That would make sense looking at Jim Harbaugh's past coaching experiences and the offenses that Greg Roman has typically run. That's why they invested in trying to beef up the offensive line. They went and got a grinder in Gus Edwards, and I think Edwards will end up being their primary back, especially on first and second downs. The real interesting one is Dobbins. If there was a back in this backfield that has a chance to explode and put up big numbers, it's J.K. Dobbins based on his talent and potential upside. But he is another guy who has dealt with a number of severe injuries that have severely limited his time. I am not putting a lot of faith in him staying healthy and having a huge role. I think he will have some flex value, but I think Edwards is probably going to be the lead here. And I like him low-end running back 2, high-end running back 3. Herbert, obviously the quarterback. I don't think they're going to have as robust a pass offense either in the amount that they attempt or with the young players and kind of the transition and the way that goes. I think Herbert's going to be a solid quarterback too, but I don't think we're going to see those top-end, top 10 kind of numbers from him. I don't think it's the right scheme. This is another team that I think in a couple of years might get stronger and we might see some of that bump up. But I think there's going to be a learning curve and there's going to be some transition time. As I mentioned earlier, it's also worth watching. Plantar fascia tends to be the kind of injury that lingers that you have to manage and learn to deal with more than fully recover from in a short span of time. How much does that impact his mobility as we go into the season? Among the receivers, Josh Palmer is probably the most experienced, and we have actually seen him lead the Chargers in targets and receptions during a time when they had Keenan Allen and Mike Williams. Those guys had missed time. Josh Palmer stepped right up. He's been a 100-plus target player. I think he's going to end up being their top receiver. I like Ladd McConkey to be in the mix too. Part of me would like to see Quentin Johnson, a former first-round pick, who a lot of us took high in rookie drafts, blossom a little bit. I'm just not incredibly bullish on that. But I feel about Josh Palmer a little bit the way I feel about Cortland Sutton. I think they'll be number one on what isn't a spectacular passing offense and what isn't a spectacular passing team. I'm a little higher on Sutton than Palmer, but I think Palmer ends up in that wide receiver 4 or 5 range. I also think Ladd McConkey won't be far behind him, and I think we will in the wide receiver 6 range. We could get Quentin Johnson. I think all those guys will get involved. We've seen Justin Herbert before be able to just spread the ball around among a lot of different targets and manage to make the offense work. I think he'll do that again here. I just don't think it's going to be a very robust passing offense, especially not like what we saw maybe when Kellen Moore was their offensive coordinator and they were going for a little bit of a more high-octane offensive approach with all those weapons. I think this is going to be more of a ground-and-pound conservative offense. The real question is tight end. Can one of those tight ends make a move and crack the top 20, top 25 territory? If I had to bet on one of them, I'm betting on Will Dissly. I think he actually can sneak into that top 25 range. He has had some talent and upside. We've seen it in flashes in Seattle, but he always had competition. I think he will have the edge on Hayden Hurst. And Greg Roman has used the tight end, as has Jim Harbaugh, in offenses. So there is a potential. They still have Donald Parham as well. So it could be a more group approach. I think that caps a little bit of the ceiling for Dissly. But I like him to get into that potentially low-end tight end 2 territory and have some weeks where he does well for you. So how am I feeling about fantasy, about season-long finishes? I mentioned on Tuesday, I didn't think the AFC West was very good apart from the Chargers. I think none of the teams will be above 500. Denver is the one I feel like will be the lowest. I think we'll see the Chargers make some moves at times. I think they'll be competitive at times, but I still think they're probably a 5 to 7 win team. Still some growing to do, but they're another team that I think is going to get steadily better. In a couple of years, the AFC West could be really fierce for the Chiefs to contend with again, but this a little bit of a transitory season for those teams. Well, that is going to do it for me today. That is also going to wrap up our team previews. Dennis and I should be back together on Tuesday We are going to begin looking at our redraft rankings next week. The plan is to look at our top 25 quarterbacks for redraft on Tuesday. We'll go 25-1 and give you how we think they're going to shake out this season. And then next Friday, we're actually going to look at doing a single QB redraft mock. It is getting to be redraft season, a little bit on the earlier side, but next week starts first full week of preseason, so we'll start diving into that. And then the week after, we will hit the top 50 running backs, 50-26 on Tuesday, 25-1 on Friday, and then the following week we will wrap it up with wide receivers as we get closer into the season. Speaking of redraft, if you would like to play with us, we still have some openings in our upcoming fantasy roundtable redraft league. We will be drafting live. It'll be a live timed draft over Sleeper on Sunday, September 1st. That is the Sunday of Labor Day weekend. Dennis and I will pop on live during the draft, give a little bit of an update, a little bit of a bonus episode for you on the last Sunday before we get the regular season going. So if you are interested in that, be sure to reach out to Roundtable FF on Twitter, or you can hit me up at Nighthawk7734 and let us know. We will get you in there. Still have 4 spots left, so they are going quickly. You just have to be able to commit to that live draft on Sunday, September 1st. Well, that's going to do it for me today. Hope you guys have a wonderful weekend. If you want to catch up on any of our team previews, be sure to subscribe to us on your favorite podcast platform. We've been plowing through these team previews. You can get 2 per episode. We started all the way back in June. The season is finally here, almost upon us. Looking forward to diving into rankings starting on Monday. Until then, you guys have a wonderful